The dawn light cut through Manhattan like a golden blade as black SUVs pulled up behind the ABC studios. Meghan Markle stepped out, dressed in an immaculately tailored ivory coat, her demeanor calm but purposeful. Inside the studio, the Good Morning America crew buzzed with their usual controlled chaos. George Stephanopoulos, caffeinated and clipped in movement, reviewed his talking points while producers whispered last-minute notes into headsets. Meghan entered quietly, her presence immediately commanding attention. She smiled politely at the makeup artist, adjusted the lapel of her coat in the mirror, and took a deep breath. The segment was billed as a conversation about her latest philanthropic project, but off-camera rumblings hinted George had a surprise direction in mind. As the theme music hit and the cameras blinked to life, she stepped onto the set with grace and sat opposite George beneath the searing studio lights. The first few exchanges were cordial, measured praise, reflections on advocacy, until George's expression subtly shifted. "Meghan," he said, voice dipped in velvet skepticism. "Some say your recent remarks on the royal family were less about justice and more about rebranding. How do you respond to critics who see your activism as strategic image management?" The room tightened. Meghan's face didn't flinch, but her pupils sharpened. "Is that what this is?" she replied, tone like steel beneath silk. "A character assassination disguised as journalism." George blinked, surprised by the sharpness in her voice. He leaned back in his chair, clasping his hands, trying to maintain a neutral expression as he pushed forward. "No, I'm just relaying what's out there. Public perception matters, right?" Meghan adjusted her posture, eyes locked onto him now. "Public perception has been used to vilify women who speak, especially women who don't fit a convenient mold." She said, each word deliberate, each syllable placed like a chess piece. The control room whispered frantic notes through the earpieces of the co-hosts off camera. The tension was real. George gave a practiced nod and tried a softer route. "But don't you think transparency applies to everyone in the spotlight?" Meghan's response was swift. "Transparency isn't the same as exploitation," she said. "You're not asking questions. You're performing an interrogation with a smile." George's jaw clenched ever so slightly. "I think that's a bit unfair," he said, measured. "You agreed to come here and speak openly." Meghan's eyes flashed. "Openly, yes, not submissively." The audience in the studio stopped clapping, unsure if this was part of the segment or something very real unraveling on live television. A producer gestured nervously behind the cameras, signaling a pivot. George ignored it. "I just want to understand if the narrative is yours or manufactured." Meghan leaned in, deadly calm. "The only thing manufactured here is this ambush." A tremor of disbelief rippled through the studio as Meghan's last words hung in the air, suspended like a sword. George shifted in his seat, clearly rattled, but unwilling to surrender the moment. "Meghan, this isn't an ambush," he said, gesturing with both hands, palms open in a mock surrender that only intensified the friction. "We're here to have a dialogue. You're one of the most talked about women in the world. Surely you expect hard questions." Meghan gave a slow, sardonic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hard questions aren't the problem. The tone is. The context is. It's the assumption that I'm here to defend my existence instead of discuss real work. That's the problem." George opened his mouth but found no immediate words. The teleprompter operator froze. Floor manager whispered urgently into her headset. Someone backstage cursed under their breath. Meghan sat forward now, leaning in with the cool precision of a seasoned diplomat about to drop a truth bomb. "You want to talk about perception? Fine. Let's talk about how a woman of color using her voice is labeled calculating while others are called strategic. How my marriage is a public courtroom and my charity work is called PR." She paused, letting the gravity of her words find air. "You've had months to request this interview, but you waited until the headlines were hot. This isn't journalism, George. It's opportunism." The co-hosts exchanged glances. The studio audience, sensing they were witnessing a cultural tremor rather than a television segment, sat stiff and silent. George gave a humorless smile, struggling to regain composure. "We cover the news, Meghan. We don't create it." She raised an eyebrow. Then stop acting like you're writing the script. Without another word, she removed her mic, placed it carefully on the glass table between them, and stood. The camera operators hesitated, unsure whether to cut or follow. George called after her, "Meghan, wait," but she was already walking away, her heels clicking decisively against the polished studio floor. A stunned hush followed her exit, thick as fog. One producer motioned to fade to commercial, but it was too late. The moment was viral before the fade. George stared at the empty chair, visibly shaken but attempting a facade of control. "We'll be right back," he said, voice hollow. But everyone watching knew. The moment wasn't going anywhere backstage. The atmosphere was electric chaos. Meghan swept through the narrow hallway like a force field, her coat flaring behind her, staff parting instinctively as she passed. Her assistant trailed a few paces behind, earbuds in, murmuring something unintelligible into a mic, but Meghan didn't slow. Her jaw was tight, her gaze unwavering, not angry, not panicked, but crystal clear, as if something in her had simply snapped into a new, sharper alignment. Behind her, studio executives were already in damage control mode. Phones buzzed. Senior producer barked into a headset, "Get a statement ready, frame it as a passionate disagreement, not a breakdown." But everyone knew that was a fantasy. The footage was already being clipped, captioned, and shared by GMA staffers and interns alike. Meghan exited through the side entrance, ignoring paparazzi questions hurled like darts. A black SUV door opened and she ducked inside, exhaling only once it closed. Back in the studio, George remained seated, staring momentarily at the spot she had vacated. The cameras had cut, the crew had moved, but he hadn't. One co-host whispered, "Should we?" But George lifted a hand gently, still somewhere between disbelief and dawning regret. When the cameras resumed, his tone was forced casual. "Well, that was unexpected. We thank Meghan Markle for her time and candor." A producer off-screen gave a tight thumbs up. George pushed forward with the next segment like nothing had happened. Something about summer grilling tips. But the air was broken, the audience disoriented. Twitter had already exploded. Hashtags like hashtag Meghan vs GMA, hashtag Markle walkout, and hashtag Stephanopoulos clash trended within minutes. Meanwhile, Meghan sat silently in the back of the SUV, staring out the tinted window, her expression unreadable. Her phone buzzed. Not calls, not texts, but alerts, headlines, reactions, outrage, praise, analysis. She didn't touch it. Across town, her publicist was already fielding requests from CNN, BBC, and The View. Meghan closed her eyes for just a moment. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She came to talk about purpose. But now, the world was talking about power and how she had just taken it back on live television. And deep down, even with the fallout looming, she knew. She wouldn't have done it any other way. Inside the control room, silence was a stranger. Producers huddled over screens like battlefield commanders, voices colliding in low, anxious bursts. Do we issue a joint statement? Do we cut the clip or lean into the buzz? Legal's already reviewing the transcript. No one could agree on a narrative because this wasn't just a celebrity walking off. A morning show, it was a cultural fracture, broadcast live. Meanwhile, George Stephanopoulos sat in his dressing room, alone now, tie slightly loosened, his phone glowing with 100 notifications he wasn't ready to read. He scrolled briefly anyway. The top tweet read, "George tried to corner Meghan like a politician. Forgot she's been through worse than palace PR." He tossed the phone on the table. In truth, he hadn't expected her to snap, but he had underestimated her refusal to play along. Years in broadcast had taught him to control interviews through charm, pressure, and pacing. But Meghan hadn't just sidestepped his rhythm, she'd dismantled it. A knock broke the tension. One of the producers peeked in. "She's gone. SUV pulled out a few minutes ago. Social's going insane." George nodded without looking. "Up," I figured. "You want us to try for an apology clip? Or—" The producer didn't finish the thought. George stood, adjusting his cufflinks in the mirror. "No, if we do anything now, we'll look reactive. Let it breathe." Her define it. It was a rare admission of tactical retreat. Across town, Meghan entered a high-rise lobby in Tribeca, greeted quietly by a staffer who shielded her from flashing cameras. Up the elevator, into a conference room, she sat across from her team. Their expressions a mix of awe, worry, and readiness. "So," one said carefully, "do we go out in front of this?" Meghan removed her coat, placing it neatly over the back of the chair. "No," she said. "We let them speak first. They'll try to spin it polite. But the footage speaks louder." Her voice was calm, her composure precise. She sipped tea from a paper cup, then added, "And if they try to turn it into another angry woman narrative, I'll respond. On my terms. Not theirs." Her phone buzzed again. OM, a media ally, simply read, "One that O'Shea locked the screen." Leaned back, and EXHFIRE had started weather to gasoline asterisk.